What is degeneracy? Well, it has multiple meanings depending on the context and, crucially, who you ask, ranging from an immoral or corrupt action to black people being in Batman movies, or even, as we're about to see here, basically anything the right wing doesn't like. Most often in far-right circles, you see it being used to refer to LGBTQ+ people or sexually liberated women because, well, the right wing both hate and fear any kind of sex that doesn't fall neatly into the category of missionary position with a submissive woman who isn't enjoying herself, which makes sense because the modern political usage of the term originates from Nazi Germany, where modernist and especially Dadaist art and art deemed subversive was decried and banned from being displayed due to it being deemed an insult to German feeling or un-German. There were further slurs and often untrue connotations attached, such as the idea that it was inherently Jewish or communist in nature. The Nazis believed that Judaism and Marxism were inherently linked, hence the cultural Marxism meme that the far right continue to use to this day to smear diversity in popular media as some kind of Jewish conspiracy. Artists deemed degenerate were often harshly punished, many being dismissed from teaching positions, forbidden from exhibiting, selling, and in some cases producing art altogether. So, what a coincidence that far-right conspiracy theorist and grifter Paul Joseph Watson, the British editor of Alex Jones's InfoWars and Ultimate Prude, just so happens to have several entire videos covering the topic, one of which is presented in a meme format with an emoji in the title because that's how people prefer to receive their Nazi propaganda nowadays, through weirdly formatted text and modern day hieroglyphics. What a world we live in. This is how the video opens. And you can probably guess where this is going, but let's see it play out before we continue. Normally I would make some exaggerated performative protest over the insult that this opening pays to Morrissey, but then I thought about how Morrissey has become a bit of a dickhead now, so I don't really care as much, and pretentious as it is, the slowed down version of it, especially with relation to the source matter, is relatively well done and well thought out. So actually I'm not going to criticise this decision. The greater insult isn't what he does to the song, but more the fact that he chose to put it in a Paul Joseph Watson video, which is a huge insult, but again, fuck Morrissey. I'm okay with his work being dragged through the mud like this. If I feel like putting something on to make me feel like a pretentious hipster goth, I'll just have to make do with Depeche Mode from now on.
Hey, what do you think of this band?
They're fine.
Yeah, I think they kind of sound like Depeche Mode. You know, I don't want to sound like a queer or nothing, but I think Depeche Mode is a sweet band.
That's nice, dude.
But I think the point here is clear. This intro sets the scene for the video, and what PJW believes is the problem with today's society. People, but especially women going by the footage used, getting too drunk on a Friday and or Saturday night. Now, forgetting for a moment that in all likelihood most of these people are uni students and will grow out of that phase shortly, this could make for an interesting and thought-provoking discussion. After all, the UK, and especially Scotland and parts of Northern England, do have higher rates of alcoholism and binge drinking in comparison to our European neighbours, despite in many cases actually consuming a similar amount of alcohol. But of course, that's not what the video is about, is it?
Welcome to the age of degeneracy.
Oh god, must he be so obnoxiously, overtly edgy in his videos? For reference, for my non-British viewers, that's a Brexit Party hat he's wearing. The Brexit Party, incidentally, is Nigel Farage's newest far-right outfit full of racist losers who recently won a bunch of seats in the EU Parliament, which they spent the last 3 years telling us was unelected, pretending that they're the only MEPs doing any work by taking photos in the EU Parliament whilst everyone else was at lunch, and are heavily associated with the far-right group Britain First, a member of whom murdered an elected politician in cold blood over her positions on Brexit. Now, obviously, this is expected of far-right personality Paul Joseph Watson here, but I must say it is rather surprising, considering that in the aforementioned EU elections he actually campaigned for UKIP, Farage's previous outfit, and lost spectacularly.
The number of people dying from drug overdoses in the United States is at its highest level ever. Deaths from alcohol abuse have almost doubled since 1999.
This part is definitely true, though unlike Paul, who's going to go on to claim that this is due to our culture of permissiveness and tolerance, and implicitly the Jews, I actually have a more rational explanation. Put simply, capitalism. I brought this up in a little more depth than I'm able to here in my video entitled How Capitalism Ruined Your Health, but to boil it down to its most simple form, a lot of addiction is caused by the stress, alienation and mental strain that capitalism imposes upon the average person, which in some cases is alleviated by having a big blowout every Friday night, trying to numb the pain with drugs, alcohol, sex and so on. Additionally, in recent years, the main cause of the increase in death by drug overdose, as well as addiction in general, has been the opioid crisis, which was created and then further exacerbated by Big Pharma lobbying doctors and the government to relax regulations and push their highly addictive opiate-based products on as many people as possible, even when it wasn't the best or even a relevant option for those patients, simply in order to push up their profit margins. Paul then goes on to make the accusation that his fellow conservatives are becoming lenient on social issues.
Given that America seems to be collectively more inebriated than Hunter S. Thompson on the last day of Woodstock, you'd think conservatives would be more vehement in promoting social conservatism. Instead, they appear to be doing the exact opposite. The mainstream conservative movement appears to be awkwardly crowbarring hedonistic moral relativism into its core message in a desperate attempt to appeal to younger voters.
How do you do, fellow kids?
Completely jettisoning social conservatism in the process. At this point, what are you even conserving?
Which, considering that his fellow conservatives include a guy who said he would murder his child if they came out as gay.
You have a adorable daughter and a precious son. What would happen if a few years from now, when they're teens, young adults, they came to you and said that they think that they might be gay or lesbian?
Well, I will address my daughter first, as I would take her for a pedicure, take her to get her nails done, and see if she could swim. If it was my son, I would probably take him hunting, I would take him fishing, and I'd see if he could swim.
A man who said that the 72 people who died in the Grenfell Tower fire were stupid and lacked common sense.
If you just ignore what you're told and leave, you are so much safer. And I think if either of us were in a fire, whatever the fire brigade said, we would leave the burning building. It just seems the common sense thing to do, and it is such a tragedy that that didn't happen.
And a bunch of racist, homophobic bigots who hate joy. I think the spirit of social conservatism is alive and well in Western politics, but Paul is actually referring to cringy right-wingers who try to appeal to young voters by saying they'll legalise weed and being relatively progressive on certain issues. I would actually like to agree with Paul here. Conservatives, please stop trying to appeal to young voters so that in 20 years' time you'll be functionally irrelevant as your core voter base slowly dies off.
You don't have to be Christian to be conservative. You don't have to be pro-life to be conservative. You don't have to hate weed to be conservative. You don't have to be straight to be conservative. You don't have to be traditional to be conservative.
Hello, my fellow conservative people. Now let me explain how being a liberal makes you a conservative.
I think this bit is genuinely just Paul having a good old pop at more centre-right, non-fascist conservatives who believe in the core conservative values of small government and reducing government expenditure, but who don't hate the gays or weed. I guess this is mask off for Paul here. Conservatism, to Paul, is synonymous with bigotry. I mean, to be honest, it always has been, but most of the time conservatives like to lie and pretend that it isn't. Which, yes, sure, you do that, scare away the moderates until all you're left with is a tiny group of acceptable allies without much in the way of strength in numbers. Please, do go ahead.
Your kids are being re-educated by predatory drag queens about non-binary genders, snorting ketamine and twerking.
The drag queen storytime thing has been blown way out of proportion by the right. It's hilarious, really, that on the one hand they bash the Muslims for being allegedly homophobic, and then turn around and do the exact same shit. Some Muslim parents in Birmingham don't want their kids to be taught about LGBTQ+ issues, and that's homophobic and shows the inherent moral inferiority of all Muslims everywhere. And yet, just a few weeks later, here's Paul getting mad that a drag queen is teaching kids LGBTQ+ issues, and actually most of the time the drag queen story hour is not specifically LGBTQ+. They often read non-LGBTQ+ related books, and according to their website, it's not just reading, there's also arts and crafts and face painting and shit. The bit about predatory drag queens is just bigotry and gay panic bullshit, drummed up to make the concept of someone reading to children sound scarier than it actually is, and I'm not sure what the thing about ketamine is about, considering that his ally and apparent collaborator, Katie Hopkins was recently caught getting off her tits on ketamine and arrested for having sex with a married man in public. Is that the sort of degeneracy he's talking about here?
Abortion has gone from being a shameful last resort to a celebrated sacred virtue.
This bit has very render unto Obama vibes to it.
I need your money to kill babies by abortion. You, taxpayer, give me your money to pay for baby killing.
No, I don't believe in abortion.
I don't care. Render to Caesar what is Caesar's. Give me money to kill babies.
All right, I'll pay you.
Give
Don't
me
hit
the
me
money.
anymore. Please, kill my baby. Kill my baby.
You, kill that woman's baby. Yes.
We celebrate women having access to abortion because we value bodily autonomy, and crucially, because abortions didn't not happen before the procedure was legalised, they just happened in unsafe and illegal conditions. There's a reason coat hanger jokes hit so close to home for many people. Just a few decades ago, this was shit that actually happened on a wide scale.
And family units bonded by faith have been replaced with atomised, drug-addled, broken homes. But hey, those GDP numbers are still looking quite good, so fuck it, right?
The religious bit is a bit weird, but broken homes are not a new thing. Divorces have increased over the past few years because the stigma over having one has reduced significantly, not because we as a society have become worse at marriage. Would Paul prefer couples to stay together and be miserable rather than be separate and be happy? Would a child be better off being raised in a household marred by constant conflict, rows and stressful situations, or to have two separated but happy parents? I know which I prefer.
When my daughter gets jailed for dealing drugs to pansexual college kids at a gay pride parade because she couldn't afford her third abortion, at least I'll still have my rugged individualism.
Not sure what the dig at pansexuals and gay pride is about, but even ignoring the many reasons that I would wager even Paul would agree are good justifications for having an abortion, Paul obviously doesn't see how this can be turned back around on him. If the daughter in this situation wasn't doing anything Paul disagreed with on a moral level and was, for example, doing everything she could to put herself through university, pay for an essential medical procedure or just survive, that would be a major fault of capitalism, and the result would be the same. Good thing Paul lives in the UK, so said abortion would actually be carried out for free on the NHS then, eh?
I mean, why not capitulate on every last single social moray, given that you've thrown the towel in on virtually everything else? American conservatives would personally dress up in drag and read books to children if they thought it would raise the GDP. Why, yes, I'm pro-choice. Why, yes, I support LGBT. Why, yes, I do smoke weed. Why, yes, I am an atheist. That's right. I'm a conservative! If you are all those things, then fine. But you're about as conservative as Myra Hindley is kind to children. If you only knew how bad things really are. If you only knew how many Christian conservatives engage in the kind of lurid behaviour that would put any hedonistic leftist to shame. If you only knew how many of them posture as role models for young men while living the very lifestyles that wreck young men's lives. I'm trying not to sound too preachy, but if you're gonna grandstand all day about embodying the antidote to amoral, impetuous libertinism, about being a fine, upstanding conservative, then start living like one.
Most of this is bollocks, and Paul utterly fails to give a definition of what he believes conservatism actually is to contrast against these so-called liberal conservatives, which I think is rather telling. He spends ages going on about how modern conservatives care only about traditional economic principles, not fighting against what he sees as degeneracy, which again is nothing more than thinly veiled disgust at the existence of LGBTQ+ people. How dare they not hate the gays? Then he goes off on one trying to shame these people for having fun, accusing them of engaging in the type of behaviour that would put any hedonistic leftist to shame, which is amusing and depressing to me because on the one hand he exposes himself as the sort of square who thinks that being an atheist and smoking the occasional joint is akin to hedonism. Spoilers, that's not what hedonism is, but also because by doing so he's necessarily implying that it's impossible for a true conservative to support LGBTQ+ friends and family or terminate a pregnancy, presumably including extreme circumstances like if giving birth would kill both mother and child or as a consequence of rape, because he doesn't specify any exclusions to that rule. He then immediately goes on to clarify that he's not totally against fun, just, in moderation.
Now, I'm not saying you can't go out from time to time and have a laugh and a drink with your mates. Believe me, I'm no Mother Teresa. I've bathed in the worldly waters of the profane. on many occasions.
Just smoke a little bit of weed and support some LGBTQ+ rights.
But when public intoxication and gratuitous debasement becomes the defining characteristic of Western masculinity, something's gone horribly wrong. Most guys think it's manly to pound beers all weekend, but then they can't run more than a couple of miles or hammer out 25 push-ups. The promotion of binge drinking as manly is a marketing ploy to trick young men into forking over their hard-earned cash to a giant corporation.
See, when I cover these particularly far-right bellends, there's a chance that they actually come to similar conclusions to me, but from the opposite direction and for completely terrible reasons. For example, here I would agree that for certain brands, including brands of alcohol, there is an element of manipulation via invoking masculine ideals to associate with their brand, enforcing potentially toxically masculine ideology and harming the mental health of many young men, plus of course encouraging them to potentially go through the physical health problems that can come with alcoholism. The problem is that when Paul says this, what he actually means is that cultural Marxists are keeping white men from achieving their full potential in order to prevent them from enacting true Aryan supremacy.
Beer literally converts testosterone to estrogen in your body and gives you bitch tits. So why is its overconsumption being promoted as a masculine trait?
Here, Paul is attempting to use his same soy boy talking point, but it's much less effective, partly due to the fact that people have been drinking beer in the Western world for centuries, and we have yet to see mass feminization occurring, but also, whilst there have been studies showing that hops may have some effect on hormones, this is due to minute traces within it of, wait for it, phytoestrogens. Yes, Paul has made the exact same mistake H-Bomber Guy taught me you arsehole over, again.
Soy contains phytoestrogens, which are obviously feminizing, because they're the plant version of estrogen, resulting in lowered testosterone along with stuff like man boobs or being turned into a weak-willed feminist who definitely doesn't even lift. Now, Dr. Daniels' description doesn't list any sources for this, and the rational skeptic thing to do in this context would obviously be to just assume that means there aren't any without checking. So alas, it seems that I'm not a true skeptic yet. I'm just a mere mortal. Because I went and checked anyway. And I did find some studies. But how do I put this in a way that makes it not sound rude? The studies didn't say anything like what this lying liar lied about. Now, at this point in my research, I was wondering, why are phytoestrogens even called estrogens when taking them doesn't seem to affect the levels of estrogen or testosterone in your blood? Well, it's because in terms of chemical structure, they're very similar. Here's a handy picture I found on Wikipedia comparing the makeup of isoflavones and coumastanes to estradiol, the major estrogen hormone. Their construction is very similar, but the actual chemical components are very different. This means they do bind with estrogen receptors, but the effects are very different because, to put it scientifically, they're made of different stuff. This means that they don't really have comparable effects.
Oh, and it's also in far too low levels to even register apparently, so there's that too. In the words of Richard Van Bremen, a professor of medical chemistry at the University of Illinois College of Pharmacy in Chicago, it's true that there's a minute quality of the estrogen-like compound known as fucking hell, okay. 8-phenylalanine, that'll do, in hops, and there ought to be a trace of it in beer, but I would say the levels are far too low to function as a hormone disruptor.
Degeneracy is a broad topic, but at its core you'll find alcoholism, and nobody does alcoholism quite like the British.
Alcoholism is a new one because the Nazis, the originators of the modern political usage of the term, were big drinkers themselves, but let's be honest here, at this point degeneracy is an irrelevant term, because it means whatever the person using it wants it to mean, which usually means that it's just anything they don't like. I want to just draw attention to the images and videos Paul uses here, of young drunk people in and outside clubs. Now, I don't know if Paul knows any actual alcoholics, I doubt it. I don't know, has he met Steve Bannon in real life? But I can tell you now that most 19-year-olds you see on nights out are not alcoholics. Some of them are, or may become so, but most are not. Now, tempting though it may be to point at young drunk people and say they're alcoholics, to do so would miss the point of alcoholism quite spectacularly. The thing about addiction is that it's not quite so obvious as that. I'm a recovering sex addict, and the fact that I occasionally had sex at the height of my addiction wasn't the proof of addiction you needed. No, that came more in the form of masturbating 11 times a day, going down on my girlfriend at the time for so long the skin on my face started wearing off, finding finding myself in deep existential depression and floods of tears if it had been longer than a couple of weeks since I last got to eat my girlfriend out, and crucially, hiding most of this from the people I loved. Similarly, alcoholism is not usually observed as people going out on the piss on a Friday night. That's the layman's definition, in much the same way as having lots of sex is the layman's definition of sex addiction. Now, true alcoholism is sitting on a park bench with an empty can of Coke, surreptitiously pouring vodka into it whilst no one's watching in order to hide what you're doing, drinking White Lightning in the park and passing out pretending to sunbathe and so on. I know it shouldn't really surprise me, but Paul understands alcoholism about as much as he understands, well, just about everything else actually.
Brits have the worst drinking problem in Europe. Over 1 million of them are drinking at levels that will knock 2 to 3 decades off their lives. Researchers describe this group as the most severely affected population of alcohol users, chronically intoxicated, to the extent that their organs are being poisoned and their perception is impaired on a daily basis.
So here we are. British people have an alcohol problem. How do we solve it? I would suggest improving the lives of the average British person, provide them with free mental health and addiction programs, and encourage them to seek help. What Paul wants to do appears to be putting legal and social pressure on addicts in order to force them to stop, which has been proven not to work and in fact actually do the opposite, but okay then I guess.
Unlike virtually every other country in the world, Britain is unique for having women who consume as much alcohol as men.
Hey, see now that is equality.
This is a depiction of English public alcoholism in the 18th century. This is a depiction of English public alcoholism in the 21st century. Wow, we've come such a long way.
I'm not going to really go into the fact that that image is from a particularly alcohol-soaked period of British history, the so-called 18th century gin craze, but it has been shown multiple times that rates of addiction rise as standards of living fall, and 18th century Britain, just like modern day Britain, was a fucking miserable place to live. The alcohol isn't a cause of the hardship, it's a reaction to it, and an attempt to deal with it.
Walk through the centre of any UK city on a Saturday night and you'd be forgiven for thinking you'd stumbled onto the set of 28 Days Later.
I can see them, they're coming!
What's the matter with you? Oh!
The crescendo of mindless, screeching, scantily clad, shit-faced women and salivating, aggressive, vulgarian young men combines to create a kind of debauched, jarring cacophony that sounds like it's been ripped straight from a Lucio Fulci horror movie.
Yes, drunk people are funny, weird, and a little unsettling. Nice original take there, Paul. Also, don't think I missed the weird part about Bulgarians. I thought it was British people who had a drinking problem. Why bring Bulgarians into it? Look, I don't drink all that much anymore because, like most people, I did my fair share of partying when I was in university and shortly thereafter, and now I just feel content with having the occasional pint or tin with a few mates. But come on now, mate. Drunk people are annoying and sometimes shitty, but it's not like you're really bringing anything new to the table here. If anything, you're just coming off as a weirdo puritanical fanatic.
In England, there is scant difference between the sound of people enjoying themselves and people being murdered. If the English disease used to be football hooliganism, it's now been replaced by hooliganism of a different kind.
Here, Paul is echoing the sentiments of former centre-left Prime Minister Tony Blair 15 years after it was originally said, which is surprising coming from far-right Paul Joseph Watson, but then again, Tony Blair did contribute to the murder of 1 million Iraqi civilians, so maybe they can bond over that. Skipped a lot of Paul just repeating the same drunk people bad shit over and over, to this bit I found rather interesting.
Why do you think giant transnational corporations and the elitists who run them constantly promote binge drinking, lottery tickets and gambling? To make vast amounts of money, yeah, but it's also to ensure that the underclass remains mired in its own self-indulgent, self-destructive deterioration. It's kinda hard to be upwardly mobile when most of your time is divided between pissing away your disposable income in the betting shop, being completely paralytic, and waking up in a pool of your own vomit. And despite there being no widespread binge drinking culture in America, when you extrapolate out Americans' drinking habits, about half of American women would be considered alcoholic, and about 70% of men would be borderline or alcoholic.
This is an echo of Orwell's 1984, a book believed by right-wingers who don't understand it, in which Orwell makes a similar argument, but for different reasons. See, for Orwell, the reason the governments would keep the workers inebriated is to control them, stop them forming a revolution and gaining their own liberation, and maintain power over them. Orwell was, after all, a socialist, whereas Paul here is suggesting that these private enterprises are all somehow collaborating in order to do this for reasons other than money. I can get behind the idea that it's all to do with creating a dependence and a consistent consumer base who rely on you through habit and addiction, but if not that, what reason could there be? Like some kind of weird conspiracy in which all powerful people are part of the same sinister demographic group. I wonder what this could be alluding to.
So-called deaths of despair, deaths from suicide, drug and alcohol abuse, kill more Americans than those who died during the Vietnam War or at the height of the crack epidemic. Deaths from despair have doubled from 22.7 deaths of despair per 100,000 Americans in the year 2000 to 45.8 per 100,000 in 2017, easily eclipsing all prior 20th century highs. The US suicide rate in 2017 was 33% higher than just 20 years ago.
I wonder why that could be. Perhaps an economic system that makes people miserable, controls every aspect of their lives, exploits them, dehumanizes them, and makes them as miserable as humanly possible. Just a thought backed up by a lot of evidence, but you know, a thought.
Opioid deaths claim 130 lives every single day. What's driving the despair? Increased availability and addictiveness of drugs caused by lax drug laws, something this new breed of hedonistic conservatives seem to support.
The opioid crisis was a failure of capitalism, and I don't know about you, but the 2008 financial crash, which thrust a lot of people into poverty and from which many people are still recovering, might have more to do with it than lax drug laws. Take Portugal, for example. Portugal decriminalised all drugs and instead focused on a policy of helping addicts rather than penalising and punishing them. Portugal has since seen a dramatic decrease in drug-related crime in general, and the well-being of the general population. The US, on the other hand, is dealing with a serious drug-related crisis and will chuck you in jail for decades over a little bit of weed in some places.
Collapsing birth rates and declining marriage rates, something this new breed of hedonistic conservatives seem to support.
Do you not think that perhaps falling marriage and birth rates might have something to do with the impending climate disaster? After all, who'd want to raise a child into a world that's going to go to shit in a couple of decades? And economic insecurity? I don't know about you, but both weddings and kids look to me to be extremely expensive. Since I currently can't afford to pay all my bills most of the time, maybe let's just move in together and get a couple of cats instead, yeah?
Increasing secularization, something this new breed of hedonistic conservatives seem to support.
Have you ever read the Bible? People get off their tits all the fucking time in that book. Jesus was a party animal who drank so much his blood turned into wine, and also he turned water into wine one time when the hosts of a party he was at forgot to stock up on the old vino too.
And social media, which when it comes to giving them carte blanche to do whatever they want, my private company, is something this new breed of hedonistic conservatives seem to support.
Do you not believe in the rights of a private company to act as it sees fit, Paul? Should the government get involved and curtail the rights of private enterprises? Should, for example, the government force private companies to cater to all people and make it illegal to refuse to serve LGBTQ+ people based on religious beliefs? I seem to recall you and your mates being very much against bakers being forced to make gay wedding cakes, for example, and privately owned venues having to perform gay marriages back in the day, but I guess this is different because it affects you.
What fantastic advice does that legacy bastion of conservatism, the National Review, have for its readership, many of whom are at huge risk of becoming another death of despair statistic? Lift weights? Go to church? Have babies? No. Watch more television!
Why should go to church and have babies be positive steps towards preventing death by despair? In church you'll be told you'd go to hell if you have any sort of fun, and adding looking after a baby to an already upsetting and stressful life is going to make the situation worse, not better.
Obey, consume, conform.
It really boils down to our ability to accept. We don't need pessimism. There are no limits.
It figures it would be something like this.
Much like 1984, the right love to take they live and act like the creatures in the movie aren't capitalists, as the movie intends and heavily puts across its messaging, but the Jews or cultural Marxists or whatever else they think exists but doesn't really.
I'm giving you a choice. Either put on these glasses or start eating that trash can.
I already am eating from the trash can all the time. The name of this trash can is
ideology.
Another factor that drives despair amongst working class whites and leads them to alcoholism is stagnant paychecks and diminishing economic opportunities.
AKA capitalism, yes.
Which is why they voted for Trump.
And since then, he has utterly failed to actually do anything about the situation, instead cutting taxes for the super rich and corporations, because he was never on the side of the working people from the beginning.
Strange then that the Trump administration continues to import more than 1 million legal immigrants every single year, something that exacerbates that problem. But to maintain their own...
Okay, going to skip a bit more here. Paul is just going to repeat this point a lot again. Essentially, he seems to believe that all the problems caused by capitalism, which cause demonstrable harm to a lot of people and society at large, are actually due to any number of factors, ranging from his conspiracy assertions, in which he continues to carefully avoid mentioning the Jews, immigration, boomers and so on, while citing himself as a source, amusingly enough.
Servant class jobs, which exist largely to cater for the needs of the elite, are booming in America, massively outstripping overall job growth.
Then we're treated to a nonsense rant in which Paul claims that one cause of drug addiction is too much free time.
Another reason why we appear to be more susceptible to degeneracy than ever is that we have too much time on our hands.
Oh, the devil will find work for idle hands to do.
This spare time will only increase with automation.
Even though millennials work longer hours than previous generations, which he naively believes will increase with automation and UBI. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure that addiction would increase due to those things, but not because people have more free time, more likely because automation will push a lot of people out of work and UBI won't cover the cost of living expenses, pushing more people to depression and, again, addiction.
Will universal basic income and a 15-hour work week really bring us happiness?
I would say yes, but not until after a long period of struggle, as we're forced to deal with the fallout of mass unemployment.
There is a possibility, a hope, that we will work less. Yet many new stupid forms of amusement might fill our free time. I still believe in work and creativity. If we do not have enough things to do, even if we will feel happy just sitting, watching films and drinking, it will be a very stupid existence. It will soon get dire.
Zizek is an interesting character, but I guarantee you he would fundamentally disagree with you on basically everything, Paul, including They Live.
To step out of ideology, it hurts. It's a painful experience. You must force yourself to do it. This is rendered in a wonderful way with a further scene in the film where John Nada tries to force his best friend, John Armitage, to also put the glasses on.
I don't want to fight you. Come on. I don't want to fight you. Stop it. No!
And it's the weirdest scene in the film. The fight takes 8-9 minutes.
Put on the glasses.
It may appear irrational, because why does this guy reject so violently to put the glasses on? It is as if he is well aware that spontaneously he lives in a lie, that the glasses will make him see the truth, but that this truth can be painful, can shatter many of your illusions.
Also, I thoroughly disagree with him here. We do not require work to make our lives worth living. Otherwise, why not just execute retirees upon reaching retirement age? Their lives aren't worth living anymore, right?
But Paul, my freedom! The freedom to be a soulless husk of a human slaving away at a corporate job to make ends meet so that you have enough money to blow on stimulants. Some freedom.
Imagine if we had an idea for some kind of system to replace the current one, end the phenomenon of wage slavery, and empower workers to have more autonomy over their lives so that they don't have to spend weekends off their tits to deal with their miserable lives. Imagine that.
Would you give up this for this? Would you give up this for this? Would you give up an endless cycle of nihilistic barren distractions for authentic life-sustaining happiness? Apparently not.
Why don't fascists understand that having babies doesn't make everyone happy? I personally fucking hate all children, and the idea of having any of my own is at this point a nightmare scenario. But no, according to Paul, if I prefer video games to a miserable life of poverty and struggle, chained to a stupid, helpless monkey I have to keep alive and hopefully not fuck up for the rest of my life, I'm just making a poor decision. Yeah, I'm sure that'll be great for the kid to have a parent that doesn't want it and resents its very existence. I'm not even a big fan of video games, but it seems like a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned.
Did you hear about this new sexual fetish? Couples repeatedly getting pregnant, then having multiple abortions. What a time to be alive. Question regarding abortions and breeding fetish. I have a female friend who has a really powerful fetish for breeding. She has never used any type of birth control. She is with a male partner currently who is just like her, into breeding, and they've been practicing their fetish for quite a few abortions. I know this fetish. My girlfriend and me have the same fetish. My girlfriend enjoys her pregnancies, and she enjoys the abortion.
This is not a common thing. You can't extrapolate this out to the wider population, and also, if abortion wasn't legal, in all likelihood they would be doing it with coat hangers or in back alleys, so as weird and potentially fucked up as it may be, mostly because of all the time and money they're costing the healthcare system, it's probably best that they're staying safe while doing it.
Her preferred date for the abort is between 20 and 24 weeks of gestation. I enjoy it to make her pregnant, and I enjoy the time of her pregnancy. She has no menstrual period, and she is sexual, very active. This is what a baby looks like at 20 weeks. That's halfway through the pregnancy. They have ears, toes, fingers. They feel pain.
No, it's not. This is what a baby looks like at 20 weeks, and is definitely not able to survive outside the womb at that time.
Breaking Iceland's new liberalised abortion law has gone into effect. Women are now able to access abortion on request up to 22 weeks of pregnancy, and minors are no longer obligated to obtain parental or guardian consent. Disgusting.
Nah, delicious. 7 billion is too many. We should scoop the little fuckers' innards out and mail them to your kind.
Thanks for that ringing endorsement.
Again, this is broadly positive, but Paul chooses this one Twitter user, who is definitely joking by the way, to respond to rather than the many more serious comments or any of the absolute garbage people responding to the original. The rest of this is just Paul complaining about how extremely fringe fetishes and people on the internet maybe being a little extreme in their decision to satisfy said fetishes. It's clearly a dishonest argument that means essentially nothing.
Where's that meme of God pressing the reset button when you need it? There it is.
But what causes this degeneracy, Paul?
So in summary, everyone's atomized, disenfranchised, depressed and lonely, mainly because of modern technology, the loss of faith, and a complete failure of hypercapitalism to enrich their lives with any purpose or meaning. And to cope with that, they're all on drugs, becoming alcoholics and killing themselves, or a combination of all three. Or they're turning to increasingly more degenerate sexual fetishes and alternative lifestyles, including sex infanticide, getting people to poop in their mouths, or getting their limbs hacked off. And many conservatives are so petrified about losing appeal or appearing uncool that they've abandoned all their conservative principles and won't say a word against it. Them GDP numbers though.
Welcome to the revolution, Comrade Watson. Just one final thing before we finish. Paul has a good old whine about how Patreon banned him for hate speech and targeted harassment, which he definitely absolutely did do.
My voice is being silenced by free speech hating Silicon Valley giants who want me disappeared forever. It's absolutely crucial that you support me by donating at Subscribestar.
And it's fucking hilarious. Yes, all the tech billionaires specifically hate the right, who generally believe them to be hard workers who pull themselves up by their bootstraps and definitely shouldn't be taxed at all in any way, and prefer to side with the left, who want them to not exist anymore and take all their money away under threat of guillotine, obviously.
And please support my sponsor Turbo Force, the powerful new energy drink without the come down. Link in description.
Brain Force, Survival Shield X2. Every morning before I start writing or shooting a video, I take 2 capsules of Brain Force. This is the engine of the life essence.
So that was interesting, wasn't it? Blatant propaganda and lies, of course, but I think the most striking point of the whole thing was the way he made all these wild assertions and didn't bother to back them up with any kind of evidence whatsoever, just assuming that his audience would nod along, either due to ideology or ignorance. Hot take. Fascist propaganda often makes very little sense. I don't think we ever really got a solid definition of degeneracy this whole time, you know. Very odd, this. I'm beginning to realise that the reason all this shit works as well as it does is that these dickheads say so much provably incorrect stuff in such quick succession that in order to refute them, you have to stop them every few seconds, go to Google, read up on the subject yourself, and realise that they're either lying or misinterpreting the data. And whilst people like me can do that, we can't do it for every video, and usually our videos get significantly fewer views than the ones we're responding to. See, this is the thing about fascists. They will often use ideas like wealth disparity and class dynamics to a point where it's almost like they understand them, and then rather than blaming it on the system, which is correct of course, they will just turn around and blame it on the Jews or immigrants instead. It's very weird.
Nothing deters the males as they consume several times their weight in stella until they reach the vegetation that they need if they are to lay the females. Eventually, they form pairs. As the males grab the females, their testicles flush red. But all too soon, the staff force both males and females to leave. Getting back home is a major undertaking. The males fight. These females are so full of stella that they can barely walk. They're desperate for food. This male is in urgent need of a piss. He flashes in the darkness. Nearby, a female starts to regurgitate a mouthful of fish and chips. Life in Britain is not all roses.
I don't need no speed. No. I don't need no heroin. No thanks. I don't want no coke. Not today. You can keep your ketamine. Yeah.